Okay, action.
Where were you born?
I was born in the Army Hospital at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, 1929.
And what was a typical day in your childhood like?
Traveling. So I was born in Oklahoma. Within a year, we went to the Philippines. We were there 3 years. We moved back to Oklahoma, to Lawton, Oklahoma, Fort Sill. And then 3 years later to Oklahoma City. And then 3 years later to Alexandria, Louisiana. And then 2 years later to Sulphur Springs, Arkansas. And then about 9 months later to, Atchison, Kansas.
Who was the first candidate for the presidency that you voted for, and did he win?
Well, the first candidate that I didn't vote for, that I was involved in the campaign, was living in Oklahoma City when I actually, around the corner from our house was a storefront office for the Wendell Willkie campaign, the Republican candidate for president against President Roosevelt in 1944. And I was out passing buttons out, the Wendell Willkie buttons.
So you were alive during Roosevelt's presidency?
I was not only alive, I was alive for his entire presidency, yes.
What's one of your first memories of him?
Well, we didn't have television, so I never saw him. I certainly heard him on the television, on the radio, because he had fireside talks all the time. Mm-hmm. And so my memory would be one that I heard him, rather than a classical memory where you saw somebody.
Yeah.
And he was talking. Every time I knew it was Roosevelt, he was talking. I never knew anything about Roosevelt when he wasn't talking.
How old were you when you got your first car?
When I got my first car was when I graduated from West Point, which would have been 1952, and I was 22.
And your first radio and television?
I built my first radio, crystal radio, in my house in about 1943 or 1944, putting a big antenna on the roof of our house, and then had a little crystal with a cat's paw that you pushed in the crystal to find the station, and then it was grounded in the ground. So I built my first radio.
Wow. What about your first television?
First television would have been probably when we were living in, right after we went to graduate college, we got married and we went to Japan. They didn't have television over there, so it'd probably be 46, 55, probably 55 or 56 when we get back to the United States, which would be in New York.
Wow. What did you think you would be when you grew up?
I thought I'd be a soldier.
Soldier?
My father was a soldier, and I went in the Army right after my 17th birthday, and I spent the next 10 years in the Army. So.
When did you graduate high school?
1946.
How old were you?
16.
You were 16.
Well, I was 17 2 months later, and 2 months after that, I joined the Army.
Oh, wow. How old were you when you got your license?
Got my license, I was 14. It was during the war, and then we lived in Kansas, and they needed the young boys to drive the farm trucks and the tractors because the men had gone off to war. So I got my license when I was 14.
Wow. Where and at what age did you go to college?
I went to college at West Point. I've been in the Army for a couple of years as an enlisted man, and I went to West Point when I was at 19, I guess it was, and graduated when I was 22.
What did you major in there?
Engineering.
Engineering. What made you decide to go to school at West Point?
I grew up during World War II. All the men were going in the Army. I went in the Army right after it was over with. It just seemed like the right thing to do.
So I found your yearbook from West Point, and I want to know what poop sheets and dragging is.
That's a good question. The poop sheets would be the sheet of paper telling you what to do, like the questions you're asking me right now. That's a poop sheet. And dragging was the term that we used at West Point, called dating. So.
I like the flotation walk.
That's where you take the dates.
Yes, I figured that. I saw it and I laughed. What was your first year at West Point like, and was it hard to adjust?
It was very challenging physically and academically because it's a tough school. But I'd been in the Army for 2 years as enlisted man, so I was very accustomed to the physical and discipline part of it. So the academics was a real challenge.
Yeah. What positions did you play in lacrosse and football?
Football I played in, and lacrosse I played defense.
That's what I did freshman year.
And in West Point it was a good place because we didn't have great stick work. Very few of our players had come from Baltimore, which is where lacrosse was a hotbed at that time, and actually played in high school. Very rare any place else in the United States. And at West Point, when you play defense, typically in lacrosse, assists and points are what people count. At West Point, we counted knockdowns. So our main challenge was to, when two people were going for the ball, and you were the other guy, you would knock down the bad guy, let the good guy pick up the ball.
Did you ever get in trouble at West Point, and how did they punish you?
When you have trouble at West Point, it means you don't follow the rules precisely, and they give you demerits. And I did one time have enough demerits that I had to walk them off, which meant we had to walk tours on the court with a rifle over your shoulder for an hour for each demerit on the cement pavement, marching back and forth until you learned your lesson that you're not supposed to get demerits.
What did you do to get a demerit?
Well, I maybe didn't have my rifle cleaned properly, or my shoes weren't polished properly, or my clothes weren't arranged properly.
It's pretty intense.
Well, it's exactly the kind of things that I'm trying to get my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to follow. Not very successfully.
Well, you need to have the intensity that West Point had.
Well, you need to have the penalties that West Point has. It helps sharpen the mind.
What was your ranking?
At West Point, I was a cadet captain. I was company commander of my company.
That's cool. Why did you ever jump out of perfectly good airplanes?
I didn't trust the pilots. Actually, the first 10 times I took off from an airplane, I only landed once. And the other 9 times I felt very safe.
What do you think the difference between each parts of the armed forces is?
Well, the Navy is in a boat, the Air Force is in an airplane, and I can tell you in the Army you walk in the infantry.
Who's your biggest rival from West Point?
Well, of course, from West Point, it's Annapolis. The Navy would, of course, be the major. It's kind of interesting because our class was the first class at West Point that had to go to Annapolis for a week, live in the barracks, go to classes and all. They had to come to West Point for a week. And in our 50th reunion, I guess it was, when we were commiserating on our past histories and all, we still call that week West Point Appreciation Week. You don't appreciate West Point until you've been to Annapolis for a week and realize how bad it is over there.
Can you tell me the secret that you've carried with you since the day you landed on enemy territory is?
Well, in the first place, I never landed on enemy territories. So I've been,
well,
the first secret is don't.
Or like, not enemy territory, but in Japan.
Well, Japan wasn't enemy territory because the war was over, but when I arrived in 46, it was right a year after the end of the war. And it's like every place else, if you obey the rules, everybody's happy. Don't get in trouble.
That's a secret.
That's the number one rule.
Number one rule. When did you know you weren't going to stay in the military?
Well, probably a year after we were in Japan, and I realized that it was just not the time and the place for somebody who wanted to have a big family, which I did to be. So when, probably with a year to go from the time we were in Japan, we decided we were going to get out of the Army.
Why did you choose to, oh, you just answered that. Yeah. How and when did you meet Popere?
Her brother was in my company at West Point, a year ahead of me. And at the lacrosse tables, we have tables for 12 guys by sports. I was playing on lacrosse team. Her brother was on the lacrosse team, and I was bemoaning my plight because the Army-Navy game was coming up within about 3 weeks, and I didn't have a date. And the other guy at the table, upperclassman, said, well, you ought to get a date with your John Meyer's sister. And I took one look at Shy and said, no, not me. I'm not going to date her. And he said, no, I know her. She doesn't look at all like her brother. So I got a date with Mary Lou, a blind date at the Army-Navy game.
What was your first impression of her?
I'm going to marry her.
You?
The first night, oh, sure.
Oh, wow. Where was your first house with Mommy?
First house we owned would have been in Baltimore, Maryland. It was a brand new house that was built in Towson, which is a northern suburb of Baltimore.
So, I remember you telling me at dinner a little while ago that you were in this magazine.
Look magazine.
Look magazine. And I found your article. Right up. Here. Is it a little strange to see this again?
It's a little strange to see it again, is right. It's a long time ago.
I think this is my favorite picture. I love that picture.
Well, there was an article about guys who went to West Point getting out of the Army, and why were they getting out of the Army. A number of my classmates and I were in the pictures, and this happened to be the ones that you're pointing out that I'm in.
Yeah. I think it's really cool to see you in a magazine. I don't think I've ever been in one.
I don't think it did me a lot of good. Some of the people in the company didn't think much of it after it got in print. So, fortunately, Look magazine wasn't that popular at that time. Every barbershop had a Look magazine though, so if you got your hair cut, one thing you'd be looking at would be whatever the pictures were in Look magazine.
Yeah. How did the raising your kids, what they told you to do, to get different throughout all 7 of your kids?
Well, if you're asking me, were any of my kids disciplined or showing any effects of discipline? No. So if you think my education was helpful, with the education and discipline, it was a complete failure.
Well, what the doctors told you to do with your kids, how did that differentiate through?
Well, what the doctors tell you to do with the kids is to feed them and take care of them. But frankly, I'm not very good at that. So Mary Lou was very good at that, so she handled that.
Yeah. When was the first time that you two lived in a suburb?
In a suburb? In Towson, Maryland. Our very first house was in a suburb. A very pretty suburb. We had a nice little house, just been built, and it was a backyard backed into a big schoolyard. It was a big property behind it. It just hadn't been developed even, so it was really kind of a vacant wooded lot behind us, so very nice.
And what was your reaction to the anti-segregation movements and Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr.?
Well, long before that happened, in 1947, long before what you're describing, the Army integrated. And it just so happened that I was a sergeant at that time. I was about ready to get out of the Army when I was 18. And I was the troop information officer in our company. And for 3 weeks in a row, the subject of the troop information program was to talk about the integration of the Army, which was going to happen in 1947, the next year, 48 rather. And so I had to get up in front of the troops in a parachute unit to explain to them how the Army is going to be integrated next year. We're going to have no longer separate barracks, no longer separate units. We're all going to be in it together. And it was a very challenging period because a lot of these guys did not understand what was happening. But in fact, after 3 weeks, the whole Army had this In 1947 and 1948, they integrated 100% the whole Army. So that was long before what you're talking about.
Yeah. What was your reaction to Rosa Parks?
That was ancient history. I mean, we've gone through that 20 years before. What is this happening now?
So you were just like, okay, whatever.
Who've done that? It's like when was the first time you drove a car? How many years ago?
Very.
And how exciting is it when you get in and drive a car today? It's the same thing you've been doing for 3 years. Well, this is 20 years later. We've been doing that for 20 years. What are you talking about?
Yeah. What do you remember of life when work hours were shortened and vacation hours were lengthened?
When work hours were short.
When, not short, but they went from being like a long time to being 8-hour days and...
I've never had a job that was an 8-hour day.
Did you get paid vacations?
No. Well, yeah, you get paid vacation, but when I was in the Army, there's no 8-hour days in the Army.
What about...
And you do have vacation, but there's no 8-hour days. When I knew in business, I was working for a living. I was in sales and in management jobs. I've never had an 8-hour job.
What was...
It'd be great to have an 8-hour job. How do you get those?
Well, I don't know how. That's something I read in the textbook.
Well, I think it's possible if you want to be an hourly laborer in a factory to have an 8-hour job. It's possible to have an hourly job in a department store or something, but if you're in management or you're in the Army, you don't have 8-hour jobs. Fortunately, I started in the Army where there were no 8-hour jobs, so I didn't know the difference when I got in business.
How did you progress from, like, the business world? How did you get to where you are today?
Very hard work and very lucky.
And what businesses did you work in? What jobs did you have?
I started in selling, and I got into finance, and then I got into general management, and I've been in most of my life in packaging. A little bit of 3 years in the truck and farm equipment business, 2 years in the tire business, and then the rest of the time all in packaging of one kind or another.
It's really cool. In your opinion, what's the biggest difference between now and the 1950s?
The biggest difference between now and the 1950s is clearly the incredible advancement in knowledge and communications. In the 50s, since you didn't have television, you asked me the question earlier about Roosevelt. I never saw Roosevelt except his picture in a magazine or newspaper. Things that were happening anywhere in the world you heard about because radio was there and teletype was there, so that the printed message was there in the newspapers. But, it was late and garbled and incomplete is the way I would describe it. Today what you have is instantaneous pictures which result, as far as information is concerned, in the same thing. They're garbled and incomplete and frequently confusing and often wrong, even though you saw it with your own eyes.
Yeah. What's your favorite part about being a father and grandfather?
Well, I just have to say this. Grandchildren are much better than children. Because children are nothing but trouble. And with the grandchildren, anytime there's a problem, you turn them over to the mother and let her take care of them.
So what's your favorite part about being a dad?
Having a wife to take care of the children, the problems.
What makes a good education so important to you?
Well, a good education is important to anybody who wants to get ahead in the world. In the world that you're in, when I was growing up, and the world that you're in today is no different. Education is a real blessing for people who want to accomplish something and get ahead. There are a lot of people who are surprising, if you look back in the history of our country, who educated themselves. I mean, I just keep thinking of Lincoln. He was a guy who had practically no schooling, but actually learned to read and read by candlelight and educated himself. And when you look at what he wrote, just a simple Gettysburg Address or something like that, it's just really, really an impressive document for a guy who had no education. But he had education, he educated himself. And the thing about today is that the evolution and development of technology and business and everything is going so rapidly that with the best college education in the world, If you don't keep educating yourself in the next 4 or 5 years, you're going to be out of date. So your education is a lifelong experience.
What do you want your great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren and future generations to know about you?
Well, I hope that they would look back and say, well, he wasn't very smart, and he didn't know anything, because everybody knows I know nothing. But he worked very hard, and he loved everybody and cared about them.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Perfect timing.
Okay.
Perfect timing, because the